Here's our weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy.
Thank you for that, Teresa. And, wonderful Thanksgiving for everybody. I hope everybody gets an opportunity to get together with family. To do that, those are going to be a little bit more expensive, as we suggested last week. Teresa, we said gas prices would be up. In fact, on Saturday, gas prices will be up 4 cents a liter pretty much across the country, except for Atlantic Canada, which got its 7 or 8 cent a liter increase yesterday and today. So what we're looking at is Ontario, Quebec, looking for prices in Quebec to move up to about $1.68 a liter from $1.64. Look for Ontario to move from $1.52 to $1.56. And the same for Vancouver, the Lower Mainland. But however, the prairies may not get that kind of increase because the Chicago spot market, which is really the trendsetter for prices in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC Central Interior, and even a slice of Ontario up to Thunder Bay, they don't really, they all follow the same marching orders. They're not going to see much of an increase. But the big elephant in the room is what's going to happen with Iran and Israel in the Middle East. I know that we've talked about this over the past couple of weeks, that markets have been really ignoring fundamentals and completely discounting geopolitical tensions, but it's not something they can afford to ignore now. And I think realizing there could be a war there, which would have Israel respond to Iran by targeting both its nuclear and oil infrastructure, and Iran responding by saying, we can't beat Israel, so we're going to take it out on other oil producers in the Gulf region, could mean affecting as much as 20 to 30% of the world's oil supply. What does that mean? $10 to $20 a barrel, or a 10 to 15 cent increase at the pumps almost immediately because of the premium risk. And of course, there isn't really a lot of other nations that come to the rescue. Canada doesn't have the pipelines capacity to get more oil out. Guyana is still in its infancy. And of course, Brazil and other non-OPEC nations aren't up to speed on these things yet. So really, we have to look at the prospect that any day now, we could see prices jump to the upside. The best case scenario is we stay where we are. But even that could start to get compromised because we see the Canadian dollar. Yes, the Canadian dollar, 137.72 cents to buy a U.S. dollar. That adds about 23 cents to the price of fuel, and it's dropped about 2 cents in value just in the past few days. So what that really means is Canada's in a really tough situation. Now, speaking of tough situation and why prices are going up and the changes we're seeing, we know that Atlantic Canada pays about an 8 cent a liter tax for gasoline for the clean fuel standard, the second carbon tax of the federal Trudeau Liberal government. And we know that British Columbia loves high taxes, at least they did up until very recently, and they are paying as much as 20 cents a liter for the BC LCFS, which is a British Columbia low carbon fuel standard. They were the first ones to try this out. Nice to be number one. Kind of let Mikey try it first, and BC has done that. It's one of the reasons you're paying up to what will be tomorrow a buck 82.9 for a liter of gasoline in Vancouver. But I digress. Critically, in Ontario and the Maritimes, Ontario and the West, we haven't seen much of a clean fuel standard, a second carbon tax, but we are now starting to see evidence of it. I know that Petro-Can stations have changed to increasing their ethanol to a maximum of 10% to 15%. Why? As I mentioned last year, in order to meet that standard, refiners are going to have to increase the amount of ethanol in order to get that 30% decrease in emissions by 2030. When that no longer works, which is probably sometime this year, they're going to have to start to go buy credits. Credits now run at about $400 to $500 carbon credit. For every $110 is 4 cents a liter. So 4 cents, depending where we are, the carbon credits, we could be looking at the scenario as we start certainly seeing in British Columbia, where not only we see higher ethanol in your gasoline, which does not do very good for some engines, you're also going, and by the way, that applies to premium gasoline, not just regular. It also means that you're going to see an increase in the price. So bank on it, race for it. And by the way, you're not rebated. This whole argument the government has made about carbon taxes and that you're supposed to be rebated, part of the budget officer said on a net basis by 2030, most families are going to be worse off, not better off. Unless, of course, you're not someone who drives a vehicle and you don't have to worry about heating your home because someone else looks after you. That's great that we have that. Unfortunately, that's not the way you run a country. And it's certainly not a way of running a country when energy prices are deliberately and, on a purposefully raised to levels that most people cannot afford. That's why, of course, these price predictions are important, but so is being mindful of Canadians for affordable energy and the right of every Canadian to make sure that we prosper and we're not defeated by policies that hurt our affordability in terms of energy and our availability. That's it for this week. Have a great Thanksgiving, Teresa, and we'll be back at you next week. Hopefully, things will remain quiet in the Middle East, at least for another week.